My mom locked me out of the house I inherited, said you have nothing here. 2 days later, their lawyer begged me to call after I froze a $740,000 sale. My name is Julia Hartman, 32 years old, currently serving as the communications director at a small tech company in Portland, Oregon. I had just wrapped up a long dragging video meeting when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. We changed the locks. You don't have a home anymore. I read it 3 times. My eyes stayed glued to the screen as if my brain couldn't process the words. I laughed. A dry, hollow sound that chilled my spine. I texted back, "Oh, real brave, real funny. Let's see who gets the last laugh." I wasn't sure if I was trying to scare them or calm myself down, but the truth was glaringly obvious. They kicked me out of the very home my grandmother had left me in her will, the house I'd poured every dollar of savings into restoring, nurturing brick by brick, and now I was being thrown out by a cold message. I slumped in my chair, my palms growing cold. It wasn't like I hadn't seen resistance coming. My mother, Carol, had always been controlling. She once stayed furious for 2 weeks just because I replaced the living room rug without her approval. But I never imagined they'd go this far. The house at 17 Mayfield Drive on the north side of Portland meant everything to me. It wasn't just where I grew up, it was where I cooked dinner with my grandmother, where I hid in the storage closet every time my parents' arguments turned into shouts and flying objects. And she, my grandmother Helen, was the only one in the family who truly understood me. When she passed away last year at the age of 94, it felt like the world collapsed around me. But then, during the will reading, her lawyer handed me a copy stating clearly, I leave the house on Mayfield to my granddaughter Julia. It belongs to her. Because only Julia truly understands it. My mother went rigid. My father, Dennis, turned red and hissed through his teeth, "This can't be right. Your mother was already senile." But the will was legal. Notarized, witnessed, and I was the sole owner. Back then, I naively thought, they're just in shock. They'll come around. I even said, I'm not kicking anyone out. I just want to preserve things the way Grandma wanted. They said nothing. But the look my mother gave me, it sliced through my chest. A few months later, I moved into Mayfield and began restoring the decaying wiring and plumbing. I preserved every original window frame, every weathered brick. What I didn't expect was that preserving would make them see me as a traitor. And now, I was thrown out by a single message, no warning, no phone call. I tried my key in the new lock hoping for a miracle, but of course nothing turned. I knocked. No one answered. The curtains in the living room were drawn and my father's gray pickup was parked in the driveway like a clear message. Get lost. I grabbed my phone and called my mother. No answer. Called my father, voicemail. I was about to call my brother, Ryan, when the next text popped up. Don't cause trouble, Julia. This is for the good of the whole family. The good of the whole family? What about me? What am I in this whole family? A stranger? A piece of furniture they can toss out when it no longer fits? I sat down on the steps, staring at the wooden door where my grandmother's hand once rested every morning before heading out to the garden. My heart was racing to the point of pain. I had never felt so displaced. Betrayal doesn't hit like a lightning bolt. It doesn't shock. It spreads like a slow freeze, numbing everything until you hear something cracking softly inside your chest. I pulled out my phone and texted the only person who could save me now, Leah. They kicked me out. Changed the locks. My stuff's outside. I don't know what to do. Leah replied with just 2 words, on my way. I still remember the day of the will reading clearly. It took place in a small conference room on the 3rd floor of Wexler and Haynes law offices during a light rainy afternoon. The windows were speckled with droplets and wind rattled the flagpole outside the building. The attorney was Mrs. Lorraine Wexler, in her 60s, with neatly pinned silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to read through every mask worn by the people across from her. My parents, Carol and Dennis, sat on either side of the table, their coats still damp from the rain, faces rigid like they were attending a board meeting, not hearing a loved one's final wishes. My younger brother Ryan, then 27, sat quietly next to me, absently twisting the silver ring on his thumb. The last will and testament of Mrs. Helen June Hartman, Mrs. Wexler began, her voice clear, dated December 3rd of last year, notarized in Multnomah County, Oregon. I held my breath. Mrs. Helen bequeathed full ownership of the property at 17 Mayfield Drive, including all possessions inside, to her granddaughter, Julia Hartman. Silence blanketed the room. I heard my mother yank her purse straps sharply. My father turned to Mrs. Wexler. Excuse me, but is there a mistake here? His voice dropped cold and hard. My mother always said the house would be divided equally among the children. She'd never give it all to just one. Mrs. Wexler nodded gently. I understand your concern, but this is the original, signed will. It includes a handwritten letter addressed specifically to Miss Julia explaining her decision. I took the letter with trembling hands. The slanted handwriting was careful and familiar, just like the holiday cards she used to send when I was a child. Dearest Julia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to know, this house isn't just property. It's memory. It holds the soul of 3 generations. You were the only one who ever truly listened. You asked about every scratch in the hardwood, every faded patch of paint in the kitchen. You saw what others overlook. I believe only you will keep this place a home. I folded the letter, my eyes stinging. My mother muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. This is ridiculous. That girl can't even manage an old house. She doesn't know how to change a fuse. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because I knew my grandmother understood me better than anyone else in that room. She knew I didn't see the house as a financial asset. I saw it as the place where I learned to bake apple pie, where she played the radio every Sunday morning, where I hid inside the closet whenever my parents fought. After the reading, I didn't drive straight home. I sat in my car for almost an hour watching the rain trail down the windshield. I wasn't hesitating. I just knew. From that moment on, peace would no longer be part of my life. And I was right. 2 weeks later, my mother started calling nonstop, asking about my plans to renovate and sell as soon as possible. I'm not selling, I said flatly. Julia, don't be selfish. Your father and I planned our retirement around the proceeds from that house. But it was Grandma's house, and now it's mine. She went silent for a moment, then hung up. From that point forward, they stopped speaking with words, only through actions. The look my mother gave me whenever she visited, as if I were an intruder. My father avoided the house entirely. Ryan stayed neutral, texting now and then but going quiet when I needed him most. Though I tried to keep the family ties intact, I didn't want to cut them off. I opened the house for holidays, invited them to dinner, cooked my mother's favorite dishes, baked my father's preferred desserts, and they came. But there was no laughter, no gratitude, just cold glances and silences that stretched longer than the meals. I still remember the day I hammered in the first nail to hang Grandma Helen's portrait. The one where she's smiling holding a bouquet of lavender from the backyard. I stood and looked at it for a long time. I'll keep my promise, Grandma, I whispered. I won't let anyone turn this place into a check. I had no idea that just 1 year later they would change the locks and force me out of that very place. No warning, no conversation, just a text message. I used to think they were just angry in the moment, that after a few months things would settle down, but I was wrong. Less than a week after the will reading, my mother started contacting law offices. I knew because a staff member from the notary office where Mrs. Wexler worked called me discreetly and mentioned they had received multiple requests for copies of the will. The requester? Carol Hartman. My mother. 3 weeks later, I received a thick envelope by mail labeled Urgent Legal Notice. Inside was a formal petition to reassess my grandmother's mental competency at the time the will was signed. The petitioners? Dennis and Carol Hartman. The reason? Signs of cognitive decline, irregular behavior, and undue influence by the granddaughter. I couldn't believe my eyes. They weren't just disrespecting my grandmother's wishes. They were smearing the memory of the woman I loved most in the world. I called my mom immediately. She didn't deny it. Her voice came through cold and firm. I did what needed to be done, Julia. That house is part of the family, not your personal possession. Grandma left it to me. I didn't force anything. She wrote the will herself. There were witnesses. It was notarized. Back then, we didn't know how sick she really was. It's obvious she wasn't thinking straight. Who ignores her own children to hand a house over to someone who doesn't even know how to manage property? You're talking about me like I'm a stranger. She paused, then spoke again, quieter, but sharper. No one thinks you deserve that house, Julia. It wasn't meant for someone selfish. I hung up. Later, I discovered they'd been planning to sell the house long before Grandma passed. A longtime neighbor, Mr. Larry, who used to work in roofing, told me he'd seen a group of people in suits surveying the property late last year. When he asked, my mother told him, just planning for the future. They had started negotiating with a real estate development firm while Grandma was still alive. They weren't shocked by the will. They were shocked they lost their payday. That's when I realized I was in a fight and no one was on my side. My brother Ryan tried to remain neutral. He'd always been good at staying out of things. When I asked directly, do you know what they're doing? Ryan lowered his eyes. I'm not involved. But if you gave it up, maybe things wouldn't be so tense? I laughed, a bitter choking laugh. You think this is just tension? They're trampling on Grandma's final wishes. Legally, this is my property. Ryan said nothing. He just slowly pulled his hand away from mine. A few days later, I visited the house with a structural engineer. I wanted to assess the foundation before remodeling the kitchen, but when I arrived, my father's car was already parked in the driveway. He stood there, arms crossed, eyes burning into mine. "I won't allow you to make any changes to this house. This is my property. I have every right to renovate it however I choose. You don't deserve it. You don't understand the value of this place." If your mom had known that old woman wrote the will that way, she would have stopped it. That old woman? You're talking about your own mother. As she wasn't in her right mind, everyone knows it. I froze. I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me anymore. This wasn't the father who taught me to ride a bike or took me camping in elementary school. He was a stranger. One willing to destroy everything for the value of a house. That night, I got an email from a company called Cascade Urban Partners. The message? An offer to negotiate the purchase of 17 Mayfield for $1,400,000. No one outside my family had access to the email address I used for real estate. I opened a new Word document and typed the heading Portland Real Estate Attorney. I knew if I didn't act fast, they wouldn't just take the house back. They'd erase every trace of my grandmother from that land. I had just landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, wrapping up a 3-day business trip with a major client in the renewable energy sector. Everything had gone better than expected. I closed a 3-year deal worth over $700,000 and my direct supervisor texted me, "Fantastic work, Julia. This is a huge step forward." I was tired but relieved. All I wanted was to go home. The home my grandmother kept warm for over half a century. The place where I was finally starting to feel safe again after all the psychological blows from my own parents. I texted Leah as soon as I left baggage claim. "On my way back, let's bake to celebrate the contract this weekend." Then I called a ride. Light rain in Portland. I loved the sound of rain on the windshield. It was like music clearing the path for peace. Until I put the key into the front door. It wouldn't turn. I tried again. Stepped back and looked closely. A new lock. One I'd never seen before. I stood frozen under the porch, hands still on my roller bag, my mind completely blank for a few seconds. It didn't feel like anger. It didn't feel like shock. It felt like being broken. A cold twist rising from my stomach to my throat. I pulled out my phone. Called my mom? No answer. Called my dad? Line busy. Just as I was about to call Ryan, a message from my mom appeared. "Don't bother calling. The locks have been changed. You don't live there anymore." I stood there in the rain. The screen of my phone streaked with water, but the words were clear. Each one sharp as a blade. I started shaking, not from the cold. No warning. No legal notice. Not a single conversation since our last fight about the Cascade Urban offer. Just I pulled my suitcase around to the back, toward the wooden gate that usually swung open, but it had been padlocked, a brand new chain gleaming in the drizzle. And then I saw them. 3 giant black trash bags, shoved under the rear awning beside the pile of dry autumn leaves my grandmother used to gather every fall. I knelt down, opened the first bag. Underwear, t-shirts, a few shoes tossed in haphazardly, some still caked in dirt like they'd been thrown across the yard. The second bag, toiletries, a toothbrush, a half-used serum bottle cracked and smeared. The last one, a broken family photo frame, the hand-knit cardigan Grandma made when I was in college, and the leather-bound notebook she used to record the home's history, its spine torn, the front cover bent in half like someone had stepped on it. I dropped to the ground, clutching all 3 bags as if they were the last dying fragments of a memory. What hurt most wasn't the changed locks. It was how they tossed me out like a freeloader with no worth. I called Leah. My voice was hoarse, but I held steady. They did it. Changed the locks. Threw my stuff out like garbage. They know more. I'm coming right now. While I waited, a sudden thought hit me. Where were the important things? I checked the bags carefully. Not there. The wooden box with all my personal documents, passport, birth certificate, the copy of the will, the bracelet Grandma gave me, engraved. Helen to Julia, keep going. The USB drive with her reading poetry and bedtime stories to me as a child. All gone. When Leah arrived, she said nothing. Just opened the trunk and helped load the bags. Her face was pale but her eyes blazed. "You're not staying here another night. You're coming home with me. We'll see a lawyer first thing tomorrow." I couldn't say a word. I was drained. That night, lying on Leah's couch in the dark, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I felt only one thing left. Resolve. The next morning, I walked into the law office with a mix of exhaustion and tension stretched thin like wire. Leah came with me holding 2 lattes. One for her, one for me. Unsweetened, extra ice, just the way I like it. The building was in the Pearl District with a red brick front, tall glass doors, and a sign that read Amber Doyle, attorney at law. I found her name on a legal forum for victims of illegal eviction with dozens of reviews calling her someone who doesn't flinch at any system. Amber looked around 40, with short black hair, sharp features, and icy gray eyes. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a gaze that seemed to read my state of mind before I even spoke a word. "Julia Hartman, please come in." We sat in a small meeting room, the walls lined with awards and framed court victories. No flowers, no family photos, just pure performance. I told her everything, every detail, from the will reading to the moment I found my belongings dumped near the pile of dried leaves. I handed over a copy of the will, photos of the discarded items, the message from my mother, and a list of the missing valuables. Amber didn't interrupt once, she just nodded and occasionally jotted down notes with a fountain pen, underlining phrases like no court order, notarized will, and missing personal property. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Your parents changing the locks, dumping your belongings, and holding your personal documents counts as an illegal eviction, especially severe since you're the legal property owner under a notarized will." I nodded. I knew that much. What I wanted to know was what I could do. "I'll file an emergency injunction with Multnomah County to restore access to your property. At the same time, I'll file a civil lawsuit for damages due to unlawful eviction, property withholding, and emotional distress." "Can they counterclaim?" I asked. "They can try, but Oregon law prohibits self-help eviction even within families. Locking you out without going through legal channels was completely unlawful." Leah, sitting beside me, gave my hand a quiet squeeze under the table. Amber went on, "I'll also request the police open an investigation into the unlawful withholding of personal documents. If they submit false reports or try to blame you, we'll use their own messages as counter-evidence." I was quiet for a few seconds. A question slipped out before I could even think. "And I win?" Amber looked up, eyes steady. "I don't take cases. I don't believe I can win." I signed the service agreement that same morning. 2 days later, the complaint was filed with the court. The materials included a notarized will with my name, photos of the house, the new lock, and trash bags containing personal belongings, a text message from my mother, a list of missing items, including those with emotional and legal significance, a technical report from a contractor confirming I alone paid for all renovations. 3 days after that, I received notice. An emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, and just when I was preparing mentally for court, something unexpected happened. Got a call from the Portland police. "Miss Julia Hartman speaking. We'd like to speak with you regarding a theft report tied to the property on Mayfield Street." The complaint was filed by Mr. and Mrs. Dennis and Carol Hartman. I was stunned. "They're accusing me of theft? And we're just verifying the report." According to them, the stolen items include antique jewelry, legal documents, and a wooden box. I couldn't even laugh. They're the ones holding those items. They kicked me out and kept everything. I called Amber right away. She listened in silence for a few seconds, then said, "They're trying to build a character counterattack, trying to blur your legitimacy by turning you into a suspect." "What should I do?" "Nothing. I'll take care of it. From now on, all contact with them goes through me." That afternoon, Amber filed a motion with the court to expand the complaint, adding a charge of false reporting to law enforcement intended to intimidate the plaintiff. That evening, sitting on Leah's sofa with a hot cup of tea in hand, for the first time in weeks, I wasn't shaking anymore. 3 days before the emergency hearing, I received a strange email from an unfamiliar address, Margaret Holden, 19948, with the subject line about Helen, important. I nearly ignored it thinking it was spam, but the first line stopped me cold. "Julia, you don't know me, but I'm Helen's maternal half-sister, your great aunt. I have something Helen left behind with strict instructions to only deliver it if the family turned against each other after her passing. Call me. Here's my number." I read it over and over again. My heart pounded like shoes echoing on an empty wooden floor. I remembered Grandma mentioning the Holden name a few times when I was a kid. She once said, "Margaret's not the warmest but she keeps her word." I called immediately. The voice on the other end was that of an older woman, firm but not harsh. "Who are you?" "Yes. It's me, Helen's granddaughter." "I know. She always said you were the only one who still carried decency in that mess of a family." I choked up. She didn't ask what was happening. She simply said, "I think it's time you take back what's yours." I drove nearly 3 hours from Portland to a tiny town called Ashwood, Oregon, a place with just one gas station, a repair shop, and a small church tucked between valleys. Margaret greeted me on the front porch, slim frame, gray cardigan, eyes darker than the overcast highland sky. "Come in. Don't be polite." Helen hated small talk. The house smelled of cinnamon and dry pine wood. She led me into the living room, pulled out a hidden drawer behind an oak cabinet, and retrieved a thick envelope sealed with red wax. She left this 1 month before she passed, told me if Julia ever gets pushed around, give it to her personally. I didn't think it would come to this. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were a handwritten letter spanning more than 3 pages, clearly dated, a printed email exchange between my parents and a real estate development firm called Norwest Structures, a blue USB stick labeled "If they deny it, open this." I read the letter first. Her script was the same elegant slant I'd seen on Christmas cards. "Dearest Julia, if you're holding this letter, then things have played out just as I feared. Your mother and father have been pressuring me for over a year now to sell the house. They've called me a burden. At one point, they even suggested sending me to a care facility in Tigard so they could better manage the property. I refused. That same night, there was a huge fight in the kitchen. Dennis slammed a glass on the floor. I recorded it just in case I needed to prove I was in full control of my faculties when I wrote the will. This house belongs to you, Julia, not out of favoritism but because you understand better than anyone. This isn't just real estate, this is history." I couldn't hold back the tears. Aunt Margaret handed me a tissue in silence. I opened the USB using her laptop. On it was a nearly 8-minute-long audio recording. My grandmother's voice, clear and firm, rang out. "I, Helen June Hartman, am of sound mind and fully aware of my actions. If anyone, including my daughter Carol, claims I was mentally unfit, please listen to this recording." Then came the arguing. "My mother, you have no idea what I've done all these years to keep this house running. It's time to split things evenly. My father, we already have a buyer. Helen, you just need to agree and it's done. My grandmother, I don't agree. And if either of you pushes me again, I'll call a lawyer immediately." At the end of the recording came her breath, sharp, then soft, as she whispered, "I know they won't stop, but Julia will stand firm." I turned to Aunt Margaret. She nodded once. "Now you know how much she believed in you. Let them see who they underestimated." I hugged her tightly before heading back into the night. There was no fear in me anymore. The next morning, I brought everything to Amber's office. She held the recorder, played it all the way through without saying a word. Then she turned to me, her voice steely. "They just dug their own grave." Amber opened her laptop and started typing. "We're not just protecting your ownership now, Julia. We're holding them accountable for deceit, intimidation, and slandering the memory of the deceased." I sat down, mentally buckled in. The real battle had begun. The day of the hearing, Portland sky was gray and cold, as if the universe itself was holding its breath with me. I wore a navy long-sleeve dress, my hair tied low, face slightly made up but resolute. Amber told me I had to look put together enough to inspire confidence but tired enough to prove I'd been hurt. Multnomah County Court sat on 5th Avenue, right near Chapman Square. I arrived 10 minutes early. As I entered the courtroom, I saw them sitting there. My father in a worn-out suit, face flushed with bottled-up rage. My mother in a beige blazer clutching her handbag tightly, eyes avoiding mine. Sitting beside them was a gray-haired man in a black suit, expressionless. That was their attorney, Paul Ferris, known around here as the Sledgehammer in inheritance disputes. We sat across from them. Amber didn't look the least bit worried. She opened her laptop, pulled out a thick file, and placed it neatly on the table. The judge was Judith Thompson, in her early 60s, stern face, pen in hand, and clearly didn't need anyone to remind her of the case details. The hearing began. All Ferris started with a polished tone. "Your Honor, my clients only wish to preserve the value of the home, a legacy of the Hartman family, and prevent it from being commercialized. They believe Miss Julia was emotionally influenced by Miss Helen in her old age and that the will was improperly swayed." Amber didn't respond immediately. She waited for him to finish, then stood composed and sharp. "Your Honor, these are nothing more than assumptions. Here's the evidence. A legally notarized will. A handwritten letter from Miss Helen. A voice recording clearly showing her awareness and mental clarity when bequeathing her estate. Additionally, we have emails proving the defendants had begun negotiations to sell the house to a developer even before Miss Helen passed away." Amber opened her laptop and plugged in the USB. My grandmother's voice rang through the courtroom. "I, Helen June Hartman, am of sound mind." Then came the arguing voices of my parents. My mother whispered, "Oh, God," and bowed her head. My father turned his face away. Neither of them spoke a word for the rest of the morning. When Amber wrapped up her statement, she presented 3 demands. The court must order the immediate return of the house and all associated assets to me. My parents must issue a formal written apology. They must compensate me for legal fees, living expenses during my unlawful eviction, and agree to stay at least 200 feet away from the property unless written permission is granted. Judge Thompson flipped through the documents again, then looked straight at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Hartman, changing the locks, unlawfully occupying the property, and defaming your daughter are serious legal violations. Even as parents, you are still bound by the law. She put down her pen. They approve all of the plaintiff's requests. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My father shot up. This is injustice. She's tearing this family apart, destroying tradition, and Mr. Hartman, the judge cut in, her voice not loud but firm. If you continue, I will have the bailiff escort you out. He sat down, his face darkening like a storm cloud just shy of breaking. My mother never looked up. The hearing ended. I didn't smile. I didn't sigh in relief. I just sat still, feeling the victory somewhere deep inside, not as triumph, but as release. Amber turned to me. We'll get the official judgment in writing within 48 hours. But from now on the house is yours, legally and indisputably. 2 days later, I returned to number 17 Mayfield with Leah, a locksmith, and a sheriff's deputy. The house had been nearly stripped, my grandmother's paintings were gone, the antique tea set from the glass cabinet was missing. I walked to her room, opened the old wooden dresser where she used to hide her letters. It took me nearly 3 weeks to restore the Mayfield house after everything they left behind. Peeling walls, unhinged cabinets, even the washing machine hose was pulled out, leaving stagnant water inside. But I didn't complain. I saw it as a ritual of cleansing. Leah and 2 friends from her interior design group volunteered to help. We repainted the living room walls in a warm cream color and replaced all the lights with vintage-style glass fixtures. I didn't try to make everything the way it used to be. I only kept what carried her spirit. The grandfather clock, the oval wood frame with a pewter edge, and her beloved 3-legged tea table. The old dining room was converted into a gallery space. Natural morning light poured through the large window onto the exposed brick wall. I named the space the Hartman Room, a way to continue the story my grandmother had lived and defended. I didn't open the gallery for money. I opened it because I needed to prove that memory doesn't need to be bought or sold to survive. 3 months later, I held the first opening, a photo exhibition by local photographers centered on the theme family and distance. I still remember the feeling of standing in that crowded room, Prosecco glass in hand, looking at the evenly spaced black and white photos on the brick walls and thinking, I've truly come back. Ryan came too. I hadn't invited him, but Leah said maybe I should have. When he walked in, holding a small picture frame, his eyes still held that boyish look I used to comfort when our parents scolded him unfairly. I found this in the old basement storage under our parents' house, Ryan said softly. It's a photo of Grandma watering the garden on her 80th birthday. I took the frame. The wood edges were worn, but the light on her face still glowed. I didn't agree with what they did, Julia, but I stayed silent too long. I'm sorry. I looked at my younger brother. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to forgive. Grandma knew who she trusted, and now I do too. I nodded. No hug. No tears. But inside, something unlocked. Since the first exhibition, the gallery has been open 3 days a week, from Friday through Sunday. I invite artists from Oregon and Washington, those who've never had the chance to show in big city venues. People from the neighborhood, once hesitant, now visit regularly. An old lady who lives at the corner of Magnolia Street told me, "Your mom must be proud." I just smiled and gently replied, "This is my grandmother, and yes, I believe she is." My full-time job at the media company continues, but now I approach it differently. I no longer need to prove my worth to bosses or coworkers. I just need to stay true to myself. My parents remain silent, just as the court ruling stated. They've never returned to Mayfield. Every year my mother sends a birthday card on the exact day with the correct name, no extra words. I keep them not for forgiveness but to remember boundaries. And Aunt Margaret, the one I never knew, has become someone I call at least twice a month. She often tells me stories about Helen's younger days, how she dropped out of school for a year to pursue photography, how she almost ran away with a lover before meeting my grandfather. These pieces of memory, small as they seem, help me understand her differently, not just as the stern grandmother but as a woman who had been brave, romantic, defeated, and still chose to love. That winter, I hung the largest photo at the center of the gallery. My grandmother sitting in a wicker chair on the porch, sunlight spilling over her silver hair, her gaze resting on me, the 16-year-old behind the camera, just after an argument with my mother. Below the photo, a caption reads, "Some homes are not built from bricks, but from trust." I stand in front of that photo at the end of every exhibit, alone, and I always whisper, "You were right and I didn't back down. I don't need anyone's approval anymore. I just need the peace within," and I found it. In the very place that was once taken from me, the very place that once betrayed me, the very place where I stood up and said, "This is mine and I will not let anyone take it away." Julia's story is proof that sometimes the ones closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. But from that pain, we learn to stand up, set boundaries, and protect our self-worth. In real life, no one has the right to take what we rightfully deserve just because they're called family. When we dare to say no to injustice, even when it comes from our own blood, we don't just reclaim our property, we reclaim control over our lives. What do you think about Julia's journey? Would you have the strength to stand your ground in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow for more powerful and heartfelt family stories.